Dr. Sane has discussed over the past few months the 20 values that appear in chapter 13. And he pointed out, starting with amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, etc., these values must be studied carefully, understood carefully, and assimilated in one's own life. And he pointed out these values are a prerequisite for Atma Jnana, that is to know yourself, self-realization. He said, if these values are present, Atma Jnana is possible, not guaranteed, but possible. But if these values are absent, Atma Jnana is not possible at all. So it's very important to learn these prerequisites. And if you have this knowledge, and then you go to your teacher who teaches you about the nature of your own self, which is one of Satchidananda, then you have to, as Dr. Sane said, Shravana, hear, Manana, resolve all doubts, and Nididhyasana, deep contemplation. Those three must be followed. But here I am, many of us, without a benefit of a teacher, sitting near the feet of the teacher, we have to read. So I'll say you first have to read again, then reflect, and then contemplate. So read, reflect, and contemplate instead of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Manana and Nididhyasana are the same thing in both cases. And then he also pointed out that it is not enough, not sufficient, to just have a theoretical understanding of Atma Jnana. Because he had pointed out, he and both Dr. Sane and Dr. Rambachan have pointed out over many years that we normally confuse our body, mind, and intellect as I, but that's not true. You are not the body, you are not the intellect, you are not the mind, you are Satchidananda Swarupa. Your Nija Swarupa is one of happiness, Ananda Swarupa, Ananda Sagara, ocean of happiness. And when I asked Dr. Sane, then how does one get mukti even while living, called Jivan Mukta, he pointed out you have to experience this Atma Jnana, this Atma being Satchidananda, you have to experience, and that comes by deep contemplation or meditation. Then you will know that your nature is one of pure happiness. You have to take the word of the teacher. You have to follow what he said, what the teacher said, and then convince for yourself that your true nature is one of Ananda, one of bliss. I'll give you an example. When I studied physics, my professor told us, if you're in a zero gravity environment, you will float, objects will float. And he used physical theory and mathematics to convince us that it is a fact. Well, I'm not convinced. It's so because nobody knows. I've never been to zero-G environment. But when the space program began, and one of the very first astronauts who went there, he unbuckled his seatbelt, and lo and behold, he was floating all over the capsule. And then he said, it is true, satyam, satyam. This is true. In a zero-G environment, you float. So when he came back, he had complete knowledge. Before he had jnana, now he has vijnana. Both jnana and vijnana. Jnana and knowledge, vijnana is practice. Knowing recipe is jnana, actually putting the recipe to practice and tasting the food is vijnana. And so Dr. Sane has emphasized that the path is not easy, just as in the astronaut case, to actually experience the zero G environment, you have to go through so much of training, very painful time involved in training. Similarly here, nothing comes easy. So he talked about the 20 values, and then he asked me to talk about the values of a gnani, the characteristics of a gnani, as given in chapter 12, Bhakti Yoga, even though it's called Bhakti Yoga, and you might say, is it not the characteristics of a bhakta? Yes, it is true, characteristic of a bhakta, but gnani is a bhakta. See, a bhakta is a division. I am here, God is there, I am your servant, I am your bhakta. But for a gnani, he and gnani, God and gnani are no different. So these are the characteristics of a gnani. A gnani is necessarily a bhakta. A bhakta is not necessarily a gnani. Therefore, you have to interpret these characteristics as belonging to a gnani. It is one who has a complete knowledge of the Atman, who has Atma Jnana. And there are 38 values. It's chapter, verse number 13 through verse number 19, there are 28 values. And Dr. Sane, 38 values. And Dr. Sane had talked about 20 values in chapter 13. And looking through the Gita, you will find in chapter 16, Daivasura Sampat Vibhaga Yoga, that is the people with divine characteristics and demoniacal characteristics. You'll find the divine characteristics, 25 values. So there's more than what one can handle. What are those 25 values? I'll just read them off. You'll probably recognize most of them because Dr. Sane has touched upon many of them already. Fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness, charity, sense control, sacrifice, study of the scriptures, asceticism, straightforwardness, non-violence, truth, absence of anger, renunciation, peacefulness, absence of crookedness, compassion, non-covetousness, gentleness, modesty, absence of fickle-mindedness, vigorous forgiveness, forbearance, purity, absence of hatred, absence of pride. These are also values that we should imbibe. Many of these values have been talked about by Dr. Sane, including the 20 values. So if we add up all the values, and he's going to talk about the values of a Siddha Prajna, a man of steady wisdom, which appears in chapter 2, and if you add all of those values, you will find there are total 83 values. That's mind-boggling. How am I going to, in my lifetime, understand all the 83 values and incorporate them in my own life before I can undertake a serious journey towards Atmajnana? Fear not, fear not. Many of these values are redundant. They appear the same thing over and over. And many of these values are inclusive. If you absorb one value, automatically you absorb many other values. I'll point them out. Professor Krishnamurti in Madras has condensed all of these values to just 5. Just 5. That's a manageable number for us to learn and practice. And what are those? He classifies them as internal values and societal values. In the internal values, purity means shaucham, self-control, shama, dhamma, etc., mastery over your way of thinking, over your mind, detachment, nisangatvam. And then what are the societal values? Truth, satyam, and ahimsa, non-violence. So if you look carefully, these 5 values will encompass all the other values that we have talked about so far, and ones we are going to be talking about later. For example, if you have purity, shaucham, both internal and external purity, that includes straightforwardness, absence of envy, absence of pride, gentleness, modesty, etc. So you really have to pay attention to these values. And what I'm going to do is to look at the values of a jnani, characteristics of a jnani as given in chapter 12. And before that, let me make one more clear up one more confusion that some of might have. We'd already talked about people always say you identify yourself with your body, mind, and intellect, and therefore you attribute all of the pleasures and pain, honor and dishonor, heat and cold, etc., to the Atman, but they really belong to the body and not the Atman. And the reason is because you identify yourself with the body, mind, intellect complex. Words, what does that really mean? I've thought about it. Well, let's take a look at a simple example. Supposing I have a magnet in my hand. It's a very big magnet, very powerful magnet. And then I have 5 paper clips, all made of steel. So if I take these 5 paper clips and put it near the magnet, they get attracted. Suppose I give a little piece of wood, and that piece of wood is not attracted to the magnet. Neither the magnet attracts it, nor the wood is attracted to the magnet. So these 5 paper clips made of steel, think of them as your senses, and think of the wooden block as your Atman. So if I take the 5 paper clips and put it on top of the wooden block and put a tape around it, and then take it near the magnet, it gets attracted. You can see that because of the paper clips are there, it gets attracted. And that is what is called identifying yourself with the Atman, with the body, mind, and intellect. But the Atman itself, which is the wooden block, is not affected at all. It remains the same as it was. So you really have to break it down into what is available for the Atman, what is available for the body, mind, intellect complex. So having said that, let me do the chapter 12. Let me first chant the verse. And when studying Bhagavad Gita, I have found it very useful to chant the verse loudly and then mentally so that your mind gets prepared to understand the meaning of these things. Adveshta sarva bhutaram maitraha karuna evasha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukha kshami. Adveshta sarva bhutanam maitraha karuna evasha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukha kshami. So having read that, and the translation now. Adveshta sarva bhutanam maitraha karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukha kshami. He who hates no being, Adveshta sarva bhutana, who has a friendly disposition, Maitraha, and compassionate, Karuna, who is free from the feelings of mine and I, Mamatvam and Ahankara, who is even-minded in pain and pleasure, Sama Dukkha Sukha, and Kshami, who is accommodating. Dr. Sane has discussed very carefully in great detail the meaning of Kshama, so I can take umbrage of his discussion and not delve too much into it. So, Gnani, his characteristic is he who hates no being. A hate is a very powerful emotional disturbance. Intense hostility and aversion usually deriving from fear, anger, or sense of injury, extreme dislike, and disgust. When you hate someone, your feelings are so strong that you feel like your skin is on flame. Remember somebody saying, "Oh, I hate him so much, I wish you were dead." That's a very strong statement to make. So hate occurs when you're hurt. And what can you do about it? Well, you can talk to the person who hurled that insult on you, and in a calm environment, you might want to discuss carefully what is the situation that made him make those hateful comments. Sometimes he may succeed. He may see the error of his ways and might change his behavior. On the other hand, he might not. It's much easier to hate a group than hate an individual person. Otherwise, he might not. Then what can you do? You cannot change him, so he is what he is. And so the only option available to you is for you to change. And that's exactly what the Gnani does. Gnani understands this world has a place for everybody, people with different views, different ideologies, and then you cannot change the world to go according to your view, according to your wish. So you have to learn to live with the world. And he does that. And how does he do it? He simply let the other person be what he is, and he changes. He accommodates all kinds of views without getting perturbed. So he knows his real nature is one of peace, tranquility, and he is not disturbed by any of those things. And it's not enough just to give up hate. You got to fill that with something, a positive attitude. This is Maitreya. He has a friendly attitude towards everybody. And friendly attitude, that comes about because it is an ocean of happiness. Happiness transforms itself into love, and love is having a friendly attitude towards everybody. So that is how the Gnani feels. Gnani acts, Gnani understands, and that's Gnani's behavior towards the external world. He's compassionate. Karuna, we have talked about compassion before many times. There's a slight difference between compassion and when you say I care about you, that is a statement of sympathy. And when you say I feel what you are feeling, that is empathy, compassion. So you be compassionate. So compassion means it encompasses kindness, it encompasses generosity, it includes love, it includes so many other gentle things that go by the name of compassion. A Jnani is compassionate. And he is free from the feelings of mine and I. He recognizes that nothing really belongs to him. It's all a prasad or a grace from Ishvara, and he is only a custodian of whatever he has. Of course, he needs things to survive, but he doesn't consider them as owning them. It is necessary that you use them, but you don't own them. And Dr. Sane talked about that with respect to a house of a friend who inherited a house all of a sudden. Before he was just a caretaker, but now he becomes the owner, and all problems started arising. So he doesn't have the sense of ownership. Everything belongs to God. So this is like the old Native American saying, who is standing and he says, this land does not belong to me. I belong to this land. It's a change of viewpoint. I belong to this land. So land is more important than I. And this land does not belong to me. It belongs to everybody. I just happen to be here at this moment. It's my responsibility to take care of the land. So he doesn't have the sense of ownership. And he is also free from ego, ahankara. I did that. I did the meditation. It's all my thing. So this ego comes in with amanitvam, adambitvam. If you have amanitvam, adambitvam, you don't have the ego. So you see how all of these various values interact. So they're not independent of one another. They're kind of linked together. So if you have understood amanitvam and adambitvam, then automatically you don't have any ego, the sense of I-ness. This is hard. He's even-minded in pleasure and pain. That's difficult to understand. Pleasure and pain, there are three things that happen. Heat and cold at the body level, pleasure and pain at the mental level, honor and dishonor at the intellectual level. And a Gnani is even-minded in pain and pleasure. Oh, goodness gracious. He's happy all the time. Maybe he undertook certain societal work, and that happened to work out very well, and people were well served, and so he's pleased about it. But he doesn't gloat over it. He doesn't revel in that. He's happy. And he lets go of that. And then something doesn't work out very well. For example, perhaps in one of his close friends or relatives passes away. He feels sorrowful. He may even shed a tear or two, but he doesn't dwell on it all the time because he has a full understanding of Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. He understands the spectrum of life from birth, Janma, to Mrityu, in between Jara and Vyadhi, getting old and getting sick. So see birth, growth, disease, decay, and death. You understand that this is one of the values that Dr. Sane talked about in the 20 values. You have to understand completely the cycle of life, Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. Once you understand that, then you're not afraid of anything, not afraid of death. Because every day, every moment, you're dying. Some of the cells are dying, some of the cells are regenerating. So punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam. And he completely understands that death does not destroy the Atman, that is unborn, undying, and what happens is only to the body, and therefore he is not perturbed about it. And then I asked Swami Chinmayananda when he was here in 1982, I believe it was 1982, Swami Chinmayananda was here, and there was an opportunity for me to sit with him for a few minutes to ask questions. And then I asked the question, Swamiji, is it true that Swamijis don't cry if something bad happens in their family or to their friends or to their disciples? He looked at me and smiled and said, no. Even Swamijis cry. We do shed tears. But the only difference is that our shedding of tears, it does not last for days and days, weeks and weeks, months and months, because we recognize the finiteness of life. And at the moment, you do feel the separation, you do feel the things. So we are, after all, human. We are not robots, and we do have feelings. Therefore, we do that too. And so the trick is that the Jnani appreciates the good things that happen to him. He also recognizes the not so good things that happen to him. But in either case, he maintains equanimity. Samatvam yoga uchyate. In chapter 3, you describe definition of yoga. Samatvam yoga uchyate. Yoga karmasa kaushalam. Discrimination in action is yoga, and accepting the result of your actions as prasada buddhi, and that is also yoga. So he has that prasada buddhi, and therefore he remains calm even amidst pleasure and pain. This is something that does not come overnight. You really have to think about it. You really have to be involved in situations where you have pleasure, where you've encountered pain, And then you have to consciously not overreact and not dwell on either the pleasure or the pain, but handle them as they come with equanimity, with steadiness. And that comes by practice. It just doesn't come overnight. And he's accommodating, he's a kshemi. We talked about the kshemi before. And basically, he says, well, there's only so much I can do, so much I can change, but there are many things that are beyond my control. I may as well learn to live with it. That's being accommodated. And then he goes on to say in verse 14, Santushtaha satatam yogi yatatma drudha nischayah mayurpita mano buddhihi yo madbhakta same priyah Santushta satatam yogi yatatma drudha nischayah mayurpita mano buddhihi madbhakta same yo madbhakta same priyah. Is ever content, santushta, ever content. Satatam yogi, always very steady in meditation, self-controlled, and possessed a firm conviction, with mind and intellect fixed on me, he, my devotee, is dear to me. So this is another characteristic of the Gnani. He is ever content. He's almost like a Siddha Prajna, a man of steady wisdom. By content, I mean that his mind is not wanting. A mind that is not wanting does not have any conflicts, and it is content. Steady in meditation. That is satatam, steady. It's not comes and goes, but it is concentrated, deep reflection. He is also ever content steadily, not content today, not discontent next moment, contentment again, but is ever content, ever contemplative. He is self-control, that is, he has mastery over his mind, shama and dhamma. These are the practices that are prescribed for people who would like to embark on the journey of Atma Jnana, that you have to have mastery over the way you think. So bad thoughts out, good thoughts in. Thoughts come and thoughts go. You just watch them as they come. If they're not conducive to your contemplation, dismiss them, entertain. This is why normally when you chant something constantly, like Om Shri Rama Jaya Rama Jaya Jaya Rama, or whatever mantra or whatever chanting that you do, if you do constantly, even silently, that calms your mind. There are no conflicts in your mind. There are no desires entertained in your mind. And that's conducive for contemplation. And a Gnani has mastered the technique. With mind and Mayar Pita Mano Buddhihi. Fix your mind on me. Manmana Bhava. And what does make you fix your mind on me? I mean, it means you're constantly thinking of God. You're God-centered in your life. Very many people, for example, do not even answer the telephone as hello. Mr. Manglik would always answer, the late Mr. Manglik, a great man who was instrumental, one of the instrumental factors in the Hindu temple. And anytime we called him, he would pick up the phone and say, Hi Ram, Hi Ram. He would not say hello, he would say Hi Ram. Always have God in your mind. Your life is centered on the divine. And that's the Mayar Pita Mano Buddhi. So you don't entertain any things that are contrary to the values that you are supposed to follow. A Gnani knows that. If we could understand, assimilate even a few of these values, we gain self-culture, and our lives would be pleasant not only for ourselves, but to others around us. These are positive values that help us grow spiritually. But a spontaneous expression, characteristics can belong to a jnani who has complete knowledge of the self as awareness. I am different and better than others stems from ignorance. The more you have this feeling, the more you are convinced, and this leads to hatred, and that can poison the whole society. This kind of destructive feeling has no place in a devotee. Mere absence of hatred is not enough. You must have positive feelings of friendliness. Note that you can cultivate friendship with others for your own selfish gains, but the jnani has no such selfish motives. A true devotee is free from ego and attachment. We talked about that. And true devotee maintains an even keel or equanimity. We gladly receive from the priest both sugar and neem paste without favoring the sugar over the bitter neem paste. On Ugadi day, my mother would give me sugar and neem leaves to drive home the point that life is both sweet and bitter, and that I should accept both as God's giving and deal with it rationally. A true devotee, as I said, is accommodative. He leads a disciplined life, has mastery over his senses, is content with what he has, and is happy with himself. Atmaneva Atmana Tushtaha, as described in chapter 2. He is firm of conviction in his spiritual journey and does not waver. Dhrudha Nishchaya. His feelings are clarified understanding are all centered on the Lord. As the needle of a magnet always points to the north, the faculties of the devotee are ever intent on him. Such a devotee is ever dear to me, says the Lord. What does that mean? That means he is partial to such an individual and he doesn't care about the others? No. What he means when he says such a devotee is dear to me is that he is not apart from me. He is not separate from me. He is an ocean of happiness. He is awareness, and God is awareness. Some Paramatma, and his Atma and Paramatma are one. Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi. These are all great values, vakyas that are given in the Upanishads. So he identifies himself with the Lord, with the values. And so God says, Krishna says here that Mayar Pita Mano Buddhi, Yo Mat Bhaktaha Sameptiyaha. He is dear to me. When he says he's dear to me, that means he does not distinguish. And so, what does the Jnani have? He sees the Lord in everything and everything in the Lord. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvancha mai pashyati. Such a person truly sees. It comes in chapter 6, I believe. One who sees me in everything and everything in me is dear to me. So that's the life of a Jnani. That's why he mentioned that point. So I won't discuss any more verses. Give all of you an opportunity to reflect on what I said. And I just want to get the assurance from Dr. Sane that I have not misrepresented or misunderstood his teaching, because it's very important for us as we go to clarify any doubts we have. So otherwise, things get messy. So at this point, I will request Dr. Sane to see if what I said was a reasonably accurate representation of what his teaching of the 20 values were, or I have deviated and made a mess of the whole thing.
No, Prasanna, you did a good job summarizing those values. At the same time, each one of us has to look at each value one at a time and make certain that you feel comfortable with it. As a physician, it made it easier for us to deal with those situations day in and day out. To give a simple example, if a patient came in the emergency room, say 2 patients came. One was a victim was shot by a gun, which is commonplace these days. The other one also was hurt in the same process. So the policeman shot that particular culprit, and both of them came to the same emergency room at Hennepin County. So as a person who deals with both those cases, he has to treat them with equal amount of reverence and respect without any concern whether somebody is a victim or somebody is a culprit. So that is exactly what you are dealing with. Adveshta Sarva Bhutanam. So you are not trying to differentiate between one or the other from each other to make sure that everybody is treated exactly the same way. For what happens is, when you have that attitude, we have a tendency to call this is mine, this is somebody else's child. I'm not going to tell you about it. But many times we talk a term about, you heard of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but it would be important to remember the entire verse, which goes as Ayam Nijaha Paro Veti. This is mine. This one is somebody else. Ganana Lagu Chetasa. That is how the people with narrow-minded people think. Udara Charitanam to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The people who have a large heart, not enlarged heart like a doctors talk about it. One is a generous heart. Consider them as the entire humanity is part and parcel of their family. So it's very important to remember Adveshta Sarva Bhutanam. You described beautifully about Nirmamo and Nirahankara. Nicely, really enjoyed that. That's good. But again, the friendship has to be equally with everybody that we talked about. And there's so many things to talk about. People getting angry with people. For example, I remember a story, Buddhist monks were getting upset, asking forgiveness from the senior monk in the monastery. And the senior monk said, what are you talking about? You behave so nicely. Every action that we see is appropriate. Two monks said, the reason we are asking for your guidance is because we did not forgive that person who was giving her hard time quickly enough. So they were upset with themselves for not being quick enough in forgiving the guy who was bothering them. That's the kind of intense understanding of the subject matter each and every one has to be. Because somebody tells you, a sibling, don't bother about him, don't get angry with him, mother telling you that, that's one. But you spontaneously feeling bad for not having forgiven somebody is something a person who really understands a subject matter well. And last comment I'll make is, you have emphasized so many values beautifully. I'll take a word of Drudha Nishchaya. Drudha Nishchaya, that means whose mind is well ascertained, understanding subject matter. We use sometimes a term called Hruday Granthi. That means we go into
Not to
knots.
the heart.
Yeah, exactly. Heart is knotted up together. The thing is, to describe it poetically, we can say that these knots come out of 4 different strands of our personality as we are practicing to achieve certain goals. The first two threads are Artha and Kama. If we as human beings pull on these two strings in our life, the life becomes really a problem. That samsara becomes indeed a knotted lifestyle of an individual, one who's pursuing only the material things and sensual aspects in the life. At least if you follow the third thread called dharma, at least those challenges becomes less painful or perhaps mildly tolerable. But only when one is able to pull the fourth thread to the guidance of the teacher and understanding all the values you're discussing this morning, that fourth thread is understanding who you are, moksha. That's the fourth line. And once you're able to do that, those knots are no more. So the thing is, only way to get rid of all this knotted up lifestyle of ours is to understand who you are and come to live in that fashion. So you've done a good job, but at the same time, as you rightly pointed out, reading is one, listening is one, but again, reading over and over again, and then carefully reflecting as and when needed, that's important. So thank you for doing it. Appreciate it.
We talked about kindness as one of the virtues. There are a number of synonyms for kindness. Let me read a few of them. Benevolence, care, compassion, concern, courtesy, friendliness, goodness, goodwill, grace, gracious, helpfulness, hospitality, loving, neighborly, patience, philanthropic, sweetness, sympathy, tenderness, thoughtfulness, tolerance, understanding, unselfishness. So you see, one simple characteristic of kindness has so many things that it encompasses. Let me just read a small poem written by Ella Wilcox. So many gods, so many creeds, so many paths that wind and wind and wind. While just the art of being kind is all the world, sad world needs. So many gods, so many creeds, so many paths that wind and wind and wind, while just the art of being kind is all the sad world needs. So if you at least assimilate kindness, consideration, being considerate as our value, then I think we have accomplished a whole lot.
My thought is that these qualities are ones that many people aspire to and cultivate, and many paths teach. And it isn't necessary, from my perspective, to believe in a God in order to strive for and reach these qualities. There are many humanists who have devoted their lives to great service that would be fairly described by many of these qualities, and they don't believe in God. My own position is that I am not a child of God. I am a child of the universe. And I feel connected to the universe. I feel responsible to the universe as it manifests right around me. But God, in a sort of a theological sense, is not part of my picture. And so I'm wondering whether a position like this would be compatible with the teachings of the Gita or not compatible.
The question that you're asking is it enough for an individual to lead a life of ethics with absolutely no connection to any religion? That's possible. I think you'd be a useful citizen in the world. But what this talks about is, if in addition, that if you accept God as the creator of this universe, sustainer of this universe, and dissolver of this universe, then there's this little bit of humbleness in you that comes around. And that humility, I think, makes it easy for me to follow these guidelines, to understand Krishna's teaching. I have to accept Krishna as a teacher, Jagat Guru. And so I pay attention to what he teaches. If it were not Krishna, it was somebody else, that would be fine. But the teaching is important for me. I do believe in God, incidentally. Yes, intensely, I believe in God. Anyatha sharanam nasti, tvameva sharanam mama, tasmat karunya bhavena, raksha raksho janardana. That's the prayer. Anayasena maranam, vinashayana dushkritam, Then he says, I need intense faith in you. Please do not disturb the faith that I have in you. Unwavering faith. That's my prayer.
I think if I might jump in at this time, John, if you read some of the notes which I shared with you the last time's discussion, you'll find out the nature of divinity is none different than the nature of the nature of the nature itself, which I described in the those notes that I shared with you. And if you understand your true nature as human being, you realize it's none different than divinity itself. That's what we talk about, Tattvamasi. So once you understand that, labeling is a matter of your preference. But as Prasanna rightly commented out, is that even if you understand Tattvamasi, if you don't have the sense of humility, sense of understanding that wisdom comes from an entity which is far more superior than you are, then that it maintains your behavior, interaction with other people in appropriate fashion. So you have to have some label, doesn't matter what particular name you have attached to it. But for you to think that, not you, I mean, any individual to think that somebody is in this particular world on its own and has those qualities that is no different than something special, because when the creation of this entire creation is created in appropriate fashion. So it has to have some superior being, if you will, quotes and quotes, which created this entity. With that understanding, my humility has no bounds. I really appreciate what has been presented to us and how lucky we are, and how lucky we are as a group, a community, to discuss, interact, and learn from one another. So I think from that point of view, I think I need some entity to label, which you can call, I call it God, as the person that does. We call it lots of different names. But to me, that is essential. So I don't know if that makes you satisfied with, but at least let you give them food to think about.
Okay, I would like to know, early in the lecture, Dr. Kumar said that according to Mr. Krishnamurti, I assume that is J.D. Krishnamurti, the great scholar and whatnot, said that there are three internal values. It can sum up all the values. These are the personal values: purity, self-control, and detachment. And then societal values, which is truth and nonviolence. It seems to me that those are very confining. Where's dharma? Where's ethics? Where's so many other things? I know they're all folded up into two big categories, but I would like you to concentrate on, societal values of truth and nonviolence. Why only those, and why not expound further into other values?
Yeah, as I said, as Professor Krishnamurti has said, that's only a beginning. You're free to add other things to it if you feel that encompasses some of the values that are not present. So I have no objection if you want to come up with a list. All I am trying to do is to come up with a manageable list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if the teacher were to tell you, you have to learn these 85 values, then I get discouraged right at the beginning. So it's a manageable list. Dharma is in the background of everything. Yeah.
Thank you.
How can you be truthful if you don't have dharma as an anchor? I think what I was trying to point out was for us not to get discouraged by these values, to understand even a subset of these values, and that would go a long way in improving our own life, personal life, interaction with others, interaction with society, and that is a great benefit that you cannot overlook.
I don't know, Nayana, if you ever had a chance to see a special part made in India of copper, and not with a smooth wall, but a lot of dents to it. And to me, those are various facets of the personality. We'll call him Tambat, is the one, basically one who worked with the coppersmith, who would make those things with special skill and hammer and create those beautiful marks on that. So to me, it's our privilege as human beings to develop special qualities. It's not something you refer to it as a 1, 2, 3, 4. It should become automatic, second nature of yours. And that makes us as a better human being. So
Yeah.
number becomes infinite at the end, but the key is to start with 1.
In all of these things, I think one thing that I always keep in mind is if you take a community of people, and if one person in the community is misbehaving or does not subscribe to these values, you shouldn't automatically assume the entire community is like that. You have to be very careful. This is why, you have to be very careful.
Thank you, Professor Kumar and Dr. Sani. This is Anandi and Bala. Just to follow up on what Prasanna mentioned about, I believe, Mr. Krishnamurti or Dr. Krishnamurti, just internalizing these values to 4 or 5 things which you can adhere to and manage comfortably is what we try to do. It is I try to do, not anywhere close to what I want to be. Just to share my thoughts, you get up in the morning, the first thing that you need to, at least I need to think about, is gratitude. Gratitude for all that has happened yesterday and day before and whatever. The gratitude should be both from the standpoint of the things that happened in what you liked, the things that did not happen the way you liked, and they're just alluding to the prasada buddhi. So that's one thing that I look for when I get up in the morning. The second thing I look for is contentment. I mean, Prasanna, I remember, you probably may not remember, in one of your discourse, you said so appropriately in terms of contentment, wanting more, wanting different. The 3 questions one person needs to ask is, do I need this? Can I afford this? Will I use this? It's an and, not an or. So if it comes as an and if you find there's a negation there, then you don't need that. So contentment is a very, very nebulous thing. You just cannot grab onto it, but that is something that I strive to achieve. The other thing is a humility. Humility is a very, very wide word. I mean, it's a big word, but you can apply it to almost anything. But having the belief that there are people who are less fortunate. I think you talked about compassion, you talked about kindness, you talked about walking in another person's shoes. I mean, that's a very important thing one has to realize. And the fourth one I would say is confidence. Dr. Sani pointed out, and I think you also mentioned, Prasanna, that life when it starts, it also ends. And the confidence is what you would have at that moment, at that severe moment that you consider, that how do I go about life the next day and the day after? Not very easy. It's very, very hard, but something that's very, very, very important to develop. And the last one, I think you brought up again, Prasanna, is very difficult, but we need to strive for, at least I try to strive for, is Chama and Chanti, as Dr. Sani pointed out. It's one of those things that one has to develop, and I think get better at it as you get to understand it, as you get to make use of it and be part of it. So getting back to what you said, Prasanna, all these values could be boiled or concentrated into 4 or 5 things that you can do that in a manageable fashion. That's kind of what I wanted to say.
Dr. Kumar, can I just ask you one thing? I don't have to ask. I just wanted to observe that you talked so beautifully about, we're not the body, we're not the mind, we're not the intellect. So all these 3 things are almost distracting of what we feel we are, which we are not. We're really Atman and something much at a deeper level. And you talked about equanimity. A person with those qualities is even-minded. The equanimity is a very, I think, important, maybe dispassion, equanimity. But I would like to also have, mention a person who looks at pain and pleasure as the same, sukha, dukkha as the same. And then you mentioned something else, the 2 opposites also, that a person like that really seems to be enlightened. So I just wanted you to just repeat that a little bit, if you could just, because I missed something there.
No, I tried to split hairs. I said you feel the heat and cold at the body level, profit and loss, happiness and sorrow at the mental level, and honor and dishonor at the intellectual level. That's what I said. I think,
Yeah.
all in other words, duality is called dvandva, and that's a fact of nature. There's a duality. Where there is life, there is death. Where there is a head, there is a tail. Where there is heat, there is a cold. So you cannot have just one side of the coin. You have both sides of the coin, and you need to learn to navigate through that. Is it easy? Not easy. But it is doable? Yes. Have you tried it? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. So here's a living proof. I can do that. Not get too excited one way or the other.